Hello, everyone. Hi. Today we're going to look at a way to dive into poems. It's marked by the acronym SPIDER. Understanding where to start, where to go into a poem, helps you enjoy it. So I hope that internalizing the SPIDER method will give you some confidence and point to the things in poems that you can enjoy. So we'll start with an example. There we are. Let's go through first what SPIDER stands for. First, you can look at the scenario. What's happening in the poem? Is it a narrative? Does it tell a story? Does it express a feeling? Does it think through some thoughts? Is it ruminating or musing? Does it enable somebody to think through something? Is there an I, capital I, a voice in the poem that's recognizable? Do you know who's speaking? Is there a character speaking? Is there a you? Is there an audience that's clearly identified, or a general audience that's the you? So what's happening? What's the situation? Is there a time of year? Is there a setting? Is there a historical time period? What is happening? That's scenario. So purpose is why. So go back to scenario. It's kind of the who, what, when, where, and how of the poem. What are those things in the poem? The purpose, P, is why. Why does this poem exist? What's its purpose? What's it supposed to do? That seems evident. Now, maybe that's not the deep meaning, but you can get to more obscure themes by getting started thinking about the why of the poem. So the theme belongs in the purpose when you get to where you're seeing ideas. Okay, imagery involves word pictures. You've heard of similes, metaphors, and personification. Those are poetic devices. Look at those in imagery. When you see the word imagery, think about the word imagine and imagination. What does the poem pull to mind? The sensory information. And so not just pictures, but sensory information, the five senses. What are you hearing? Does it draw to mind any smells, feelings, tastes, anything like that belongs to imagery. Diction, words. Diction is you know the word dictionary. A dictionary is a book with definitions of words in it, right? So diction is the words. What words are chosen? Do they have sounds? Do they have connotations? Do you know what connotation means? A denotation is the dictionary definition of a word. A connotation is the things you associate with that word. Like if I said lady instead of woman, what do you associate with lady? Now, different people associate different things with that word, but there are some general cultural associations too. And writers think about diction in terms of what their audience is thinking about, their primary audience, and so choose words carefully. So that's diction. So S, scenario, P, purpose, I, imagery, D, diction, E, economy. How are words, lines, and stanzas organized? So anything you can count belongs in economy. How many lines are there? How are those lines organized? Are they in couplets, groups of two? Are they in stanzas of 3 or 4 or 5 or 6? Are there stanzas? How long are the lines? How many stresses maybe are in a line? Or is there a pattern of organization in some other way? How many sentences? Look at the punctuation. See how many sentences. Okay, so that's economy, whatever can be counted. Rhyme and rhythm. What sense is communicated by the rhyme, if there is some rhyme, and the rhythm. That would be the arrangement of the stresses. Do you feel any rhythm when you read the line out loud? And if so, what is that like? So SPIDER. Okay, let's practice with these now. Here's a poem by Billy Collins entitled Today. I'm going to read through this out loud. You listen, and first think about what the scenario is. What's happening in this poem? What elements can you pick out? If ever there were a spring day so perfect, so uplifted by a warm intermittent breeze that it made you want to throw open all the windows in the house and unlatch the door to the canary's cage, indeed rip the little door from its jamb, a day when the cool brick paths and the garden bursting with peonies seemed so etched in sunlight that you felt like taking a hammer to the glass paperweight on the living room end table, releasing the inhabitants from their snow-covered cottage so they could walk out holding hands and squinting into this larger dome of blue and white. Well, today is just that kind of day. So what scenario does the poet set up? What events, if any, does Billy Collins describe, or the narrator? Right, let's look at some words and phrases. Okay, if ever there were a spring day so perfect. So the poet is introducing the idea of a perfect spring day, and you kind of expect that the poem's going to mention that today is that kind of day. So the tone is established. If ever there were a spring day so perfect, so uplifted by a warm intermittent breeze, immediately there is a scene set out of that perfect day and the feeling of the breeze, and there's some imagery there. And that's what the poet's introduced to her mind. So that it made you want to throw open all the windows in the house. So we have a you. If we have a you, we have an I. So there's a you. The poet's speaking, or the narrator is speaking to the reader. And the only other pronoun I can find, is the they. And so they could walk out holding hands and squinting. And we'll get to that in a little while. That they refers to the inhabitants in the glass paperweight snow globe. And then go to the end. Well, today is just that kind of day. So our anticipation is confirmed that, yes, he is talking. He doesn't switch this around and make an ironic statement that today is not a perfect spring day. He says, well, yes, today is just that kind of day. So the scenario is that we have a beautiful spring day. We have a speaker discussing it and speaking directly to the audience. So that's what's happening. Scenario. Next, purpose. What's the purpose? Back to that first line. If ever there were a spring day so perfect, let's just do the yellow, that it made you want to, we get throw open the windows, and then take a hammer, and then, well, today is just that kind of day. The purpose seems to be describing a warm spring day and expressing some feelings about it. And we're going to get to those specific feelings, but maybe you are detecting that there's more than one feeling here. There's the awe and enjoyment of the spring day, but there's also something else that makes that enjoyment even more keen. So scenario, S, purpose, P. So Y, the theme, and the purpose of the poem. Imagery, word pictures, similes, metaphors, personifications. I don't see any similes in this poem. A simile is a comparison between two unlike things using like or as. If you say, Dr. Weinrich is like a mother. That's not a simile because I am a mother. If you say this slide is like a poem, that's not a simile because it is a poem. If you said this slide is like an invitation to another world, then yes, that is a simile. A metaphor is a comparison that doesn't use like or as. If you say life is a hamburger, that's a metaphor. You're not using like or as. Personification ascribes human attributes to non-human things. If I said this table is crawling toward the door, that would be personification. It's moving somehow toward the door. Maybe people keep moving it. So we've got personification also in this poem, but we'll get to that in a minute. So word pictures. Warm intermittent breeze calls up specific tangible images of the breeze you feel that signals this is not a winter day. Now think about the word throw open the windows in the house. Can you picture that? Unlatch the door to the canary's cage. Indeed, rip the little door from its jamb. Cool brick path bursting with peonies. There's the sense of touch with the cool and garden bursting with peonies. It's a very visual image. If you know what a peony is, it's really a gorgeous, gorgeous pale pink flower. Okay, the next one is kind of a metaphor. Peonies seemed so etched in sunlight. The verb etched, you don't usually use the word etched with sunlight, do you? Etched is usually used with something like glass. Artists etch pictures in, like a lino block to print. It's sort of a carving or making a groove in something. So the sunlight is making sharp lines with shadows, maybe, that so sharp they look etched, that you felt like, and you expect this to be another beautiful, positive image, but what we get is taking a hammer to the glass paperweight. It's a violent, destructive image. Let's break something. On the living room end table, releasing the inhabitants from their snow-covered cottage so they could walk out holding hands and squinting into this larger dome of blue and white. So the image is of one of those little snow globes, and the speaker is expressing a feeling of just wanting to smash one and releasing the little people who've been trapped in a snow-covered cottage so they could walk out holding hands and squinting. Okay, does the speaker really want to release little people from a snow globe who are actually going to walk out and squint? No, that's an instance of personification. But is the speaker connecting the inhabitants of the cottage to something else? Maybe himself. Maybe himself and his wife or partner. And you get this feeling of desperation from that smashing. You don't see the word smashing, but it's implied, taking a hammer to the glass paperweight. Let's back up a little bit and look at that. The bottom line in the first column, indeed rip the little floor from its jamb, the little door from its jamb. Okay, that image is again somewhat violent with that verb rip. Tear the door off the canary's cage. And then what would happen? The canary would fly free, right? It would be released like those little people in their snow-covered cottages. Now, if you've lived up north at all, and you've been through a winter when there was snow and when you couldn't go outside and when it was gloomy and cold. I have. And it can be oppressive and you can feel trapped. You can feel like you're a prisoner. So that feeling is coming through here. So the sense of urgency, the feeling trapped comes through, and the diction, the word sounds, definitions, and connotations. Uplifted by a warm breeze conveys that positive feeling of the fresh new spring, that it made you want to throw open all the windows in the house. Sense of urgency. You have to release that bird from the cage because suddenly there's a spring day and there's relief. Rip the little door from its jamb. That's the sense of, that's the violent and urgent action. And then we're back to the fresh language of spring, the cool brick paths. That's the feeling. Garden bursting with peonies, beauty, etched in sunlight. Why not outlined in sunlight? Etched is a more visceral word. Hammer to the glass paperweight. Taking a hammer to the glass paperweight, you have this expression of this violent reaction to the imprisoned feeling of winter. Releasing the inhabitants from their snow-covered cottage. We usually think of snow-covered cottage, at least in our part of the country, as a positive thing, right? It's a quaint thing. Quaint pretty much could go before quaint snow-covered cottage. It could be another adjective there. But instead, these inhabitants have been trapped. So they could walk out holding hands together and squinting because they've been in the dark, cold winter. Maybe it's been cloudy outside. Into this larger dome of blue and white. Why is it larger? What is it larger than? Well, look back at the glass paperweight image. So what we're in here outside the glass paperweight is also a dome. The paperweight is a dome like a snow globe in which there's snow if you shake it up, and it's separate from everything outside it. Do we live in a dome? The speaker is comparing this place, the outside spring day, to a dome of blue and white, the blue spring sky with white clouds. And what does that dome suggest? Well, the word dome, referring to sky, connects with old ways of thinking about the world. When people thought the world was flat, they thought the sky was a dome and that the stars and the sun and the moon all were hanging from the ceiling of that dome. So that's an old idea. But we still feel it because we're confined by the sky in normal life. And we are encased in atmosphere, but it's blue and white. And isn't it beautiful? But saying that it's the larger dome connects us to those inhabitants in the snow globe. So it's like we've been entrapped by a winter dome, and now we get to go out in the blue and white, under the blue and white dome of beautiful spring, be released. But are we ever really completely released? So that beauty is there in that line, the larger dome of blue and white. And then we get this understatement. Well, and you have to, when you're reading it out loud, you have to pause with that well. Today is just that kind of day. That's as simple as that. So imagery and diction work together. They both involve language. So they're the I and the D. So scenario, purpose, imagery, diction. Economy, how many of anything? We would, without even looking at or reading the words, we can see there are 9 stanzas of 2 lines each, so they are uniform in that. A two-line stanza is called a couplet. There's not a clear definition for an 18-line stanza, but we do see that these are even. They invite the reader into this scenario, and they allow shifting between feelings. Okay, let's count some more. How many sentences? When you are looking to count sentences, you look for a period. Sometimes a poet will put a period in the middle of a line, and that makes it more complicated and challenging to find. But here we see only commas until the very last line, period. So this is one long sentence, run-on sentence, not a perfect grammatical sentence because it runs on. But all of these are phrases and clauses that are dependent. None of them is a complete sentence in itself. They rely on this final dependent clause. Well, today is just that kind of day. So one sentence. Why does he make it one sentence? That's the question. He wants us to keep reading through, obviously, till the very end, and have a unified thought here that is being conveyed. Rhyme and rhythm. Do you detect rhyme and rhythm in the poem? Do you detect any other kinds of sounds? If ever there were a spring day so perfect. I can start counting stresses in this line. If ever there were a spring day so perfect, maybe 4 poetic feet, so uplifted by a warm intermittent breeze, just roughly. So I've gone through and tried to do that, but I'm not seeing a specific rhythm pattern. Is there rhyme? Perfect breeze, throw, house, cage, jam, paths, peonies. I don't see a pattern. Sometimes a poem will just write rhyme at the end in the last 2 lines, white and day. Nope, don't have it. So we don't have rhyme, we don't have clear rhythm. Do we have any other kinds of sounds? What about alliteration? If ever there were. There's that R sound. A spring day so perfect. There's an there. So uplifted by a warm intermittent breeze. Not much. That it made you want to throw open all the windows in the house. Throw and open, maybe. Unlatch the door to the canary's cage. Canary's cage, that k sound repeats. Indeed, rip the little door from its jamb. So you can find instances of subtle alliteration here. And do they emphasize? Do they create any emphasis or patterns? In poems, you're always looking for patterns, shifts, changes, contrasts. So that's rhyme and rhythm. So what feelings come from the poem in the first lines, the rhyme and rhythm and repeated sounds? Do we hear any of those? Then in the next group of lines, and then in the next. Now, just a few words about Collins, the poet. This comes word for word from an article on Billy Collins in the website poetryfoundation.org. Poetryfoundation.org is very reliable. You can use it. They provide texts of poems, just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and good articles on poets. So this comes directly from an article there. Collins has described himself as reader conscious. I have one reader in mind, someone who is in the room with me. Does that remind you of anything from this poem? It seems like the speaker of the poem is speaking to us, right? So that yellow, the reader in the room with him, and who I'm talking to. And I want to make sure I don't talk too fast or too glibly. that poem doesn't move fast, does it? Usually I try to create a hospitable tone at the beginning of the poem. Does that poem seem to invite you in? That's what hospitable means. You're invited into the poem. Stepping from the title to the first lines is like stepping into a canoe. A lot of things can go wrong. Collins further related, I think my work has to do with a sense that we are attempting all the time to create a logical, rational path through the day. To the left and right, there are an amazing set of distractions that we usually can't afford to follow, but the poet is willing to stop anyway. So does Collins do this sort of thing, try to create a logical, rational path through that perfect spring day? We get a sense that there's this expression of frustration with being trapped inside, and then there's a release with that spring day. And you can think about it, does that seem itself like a metaphor for anything else in life? So poetry terms so far, we've talked about tone, structure, stanza, couplet, metaphor, personification, imagery, simile, rhyme, rhythm, alliteration. I don't think I mentioned hyperbole. Hyperbole is an overstatement or an exaggeration. An understatement is like that last line, well, today's that kind of day. It seems like we were building up to some big climax there, but then it sounds like a Midwestern voice, almost downplaying the spectacular release of a spring day. So SPIDER, can you repeat what these stand for? Think about it, then go to the next slide. Yes, scenario, purpose, imagery, diction, economy, and rhyme and rhythm. And remember, language really goes with imagery and diction. I'm not sure why it's bleeding onto economy, except that you do count words sometimes. So the next thing to do is to participate in the discussions posted. There's a spider poetry analysis discussion, word bank discussion, in which you'll contribute to a particular type of word to the word bank, and then you'll be asked to write an original poem. So thank you.